Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. And welcome back, everyone. Lots to talk about today, specifically since we are getting closer to the presidential election and, of course, the local races as well. Lots of polls out there now. Are they scientific? Where are they coming from? Where is this information coming from? We're going to talk about that today. And also, we're going to look at AI, which is getting even more attention now. Some have even tied it into the election. This gentleman has spent decades in the science and social center. Many, many amazing experiments, many aha moments have come to fruition with a lot of his work. And it's great to have him back here. He is our professional of the year. Grant Venerable joins us once again. Grant, welcome back. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, Stephen.
So let's dig right into the polling situation. Could we do that? There's advanced polls out there. This candidate is leading in this state. This one is leading in that state. Is this stuff accurate?
I'm going to throw the following into the discussion, and that really goes to my whole training in chemistry and physics and the role of mathematics. And of course, polling is supposed to be based upon statistical mathematics. And as to whether they're valid or not, the way they're used, is another question. The ultimate proof of whether a theory or a poll works is, does it predict reality? Of course, we won't know the reality of the election until November the 5th. And that will be the real test. But in the meantime, the news media is introducing various people who've been successful at predicting elections going back many years. And again, the proof is, can you predict? Another attitude is, should you even try to predict? And that gets right to the whole purpose of what the ballot was about. It's about a secret ballot, and that idea has been completely eradicated by the news media. I'll just put it like that, as well as the political parties themselves. And what it is trying to get a leg up on being able to predict who or what wins if it's a ballot issue. Is that democratic? And I have my own personal opinions about that. But because I was raised in a generation when the ballot was considered absolutely sacrosanct, meaning you didn't ask someone who they were going to vote for because that is a secret between them, the Lord, and the gatepost. And I still come from that place as an ultimate value. So I look a bit more cynically at pollings and trying to predict rather than let it play out on its own. So which is an interference in the right of the people to determine the outcome. But let's get into AI, artificial intelligence, which is being used somehow in the polling process, the prediction process. It's got to be, because that's how people function who have at least the ability to utilize an AI app, software, and so then the issue becomes AI. What is AI really, except a neat way to do systems analysis? And systems analysis is not new. It's been around for decades. And basically a systems analysis seeks to examine a system by eliciting all of its elements, its operating elements, and looking at how those elements act upon one another to gain some predictability about the system. Or if you're looking at a system that's been around for a few months or a few years or decades, and you want to assess its validity, you do systems analysis. So that process has improved over the years. Artificial intelligence, or so-called AI, is really another iteration of systems analysis. But it's an analysis that has more power behind it because the sheer ability of computer memory, which has really taken off just in the last decade, that you can almost have infinite memory, all you need to last you for a lifetime. And that gives you tremendous computing power to speed up the calculation of whatever it is you're working on. And scientists use that to analyze systems, physical systems, biological systems, medical and health systems, to try to improve the experience of the citizen in their lives, and also financial systems. So how does that set so far with you, Steve?
It makes things a little more clearer in terms of AI. Many of us look at AI as this other entity that's floating out there that's going to come to our rescue with the information, but it's just getting its information online. It's just culling from everything out there and pulling it into one place, i.e. systems analysis, right? Kind of the same thing.
The power of the internet. Again, this really gets at the crux of my memoir in looking at that development over the last several decades, really, and then what things were like in my grandparents' generation and even before that. I'd say the acid test of the goodness of any theory is how well it emulates a living organism. If AI has any value at all, it lies simply in its ability to emulate a living cell or a living mammal, a living fish, a living ecological system. And if it can't do that, it really isn't worth its salt, if I could put it like that.
But isn't AI only as good as the information that's out there? Let's say, right?
Yeah, like any computer.
It's what you feed it. It's not like it's pulling that information out of nowhere.
Well, if you look at the analogy with a living organism, that organism is only as good as the food that it intakes, the air that it breathes, and the water that it drinks. And if you put in bad stuff, you get bad stuff out, namely illness and disease. Same with a computer. So that's where, garbage in, garbage out.
Sure. That's one of my favorite things to say, actually.
And there's a lot of garbage going around now.
For sure. For sure. Do you think that AI doesn't have a place in, we talk about the election here and polling and all of that. Well, is there any place for it?
Yes. And it is to be developed so that it has the brain power or display of a human organism, the scope of a human organism. Once it can do that, then it can really fulfill a purpose we've never even seen before. Remember last time we talked about fuzzy logic. Mm-hmm. Until computers can do fuzzy logic, they cannot emulate the human brain.
Now, can you define fuzzy logic? I know that you had mentioned it before a few times.
Yeah, fuzzy logic is whatever is not simple if this, then that logic. If this, then that. If not this, then not that. And that's simple logic. But fuzzy logic has gone beyond the microprocessor that computes using an off and an on operation. Now, fuzzy logic means going into that area between the Microsoft processor being off and on. And that gives infinite new possibilities for doing things with a computer. I think you've heard of that before.
Sure.
The fuzziness is there's this great uncertainty in it. But one of the paradoxes of modern science is no paradox at all, and that's called Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which came about in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It's a way of using uncertainty to be certain. That's truly paradoxical. And the main variables there are speed, or I'll say velocity, and position of a particle. But the particle has to be very tiny, a very nanoscopic quantum particle that exists in a quantum universe rather than a large Newtonian object where the laws of Newton apply. Quantum, well, we have this simple little equation with two variables and one constant in it, and that constant is Planck's constant. And you can use that to determine the relationship and the variance between the momentum of a particle and its position, or its lifetime and the uncertainty of its energy state. So you're using the principle of uncertainty to get certain about one of those two things, energy of a state of a particle or the lifetime of the state of a particle, or its velocity and position. But the simple breakdown to see that, if you're doing an experiment, say with a proton, and this has been done, where if you want to know the position of that proton at any point where it exists, you need a photon. Just like when you look at something in your house or around you, you can't see it, you can't detect it without the photons from the sun or from some light source in your environment emitting photons that actually hit that object you're trying to see. Well, if it's an object as big as a chair or something like that, a hammer, the photon will have very little impact on the position or the momentum of that chair, particularly if the chair is motionless. You can't move the chair. But if that chair suddenly shrinks to the size of a proton or an electron, it's a whole different deal, because a photon hitting an electron or a proton can knock it from here to kingdom come. I'll just put it like that, make it real graphic. And as soon as you knock it off its course, if it's moving, you may be able to determine its velocity, but you've lost complete track of its position. You don't know where it is anymore. So do you kind of get the feel of that nonsenseness?
The AI, is there any shortcomings with that in your estimation? Is it very beneficial? Where are the challenges there?
It depends on how you apply it, just with the atomic energy, being able to split the atom and utilize that energy for positive purposes. But at the same time, you can use it to destroy the world. And AI can do the same. Because AI can drive all humanity crazy. It can upset the trade systems, the financial systems, everything, how we operate our daily lives. So that's the danger. So people are actually talking about, well, how do we enforce an ethical use of AI? And I'm not sure you can, because human beings have to be totally ethical to do that. But how do you stop them from developing AI or anything else? Paradox of our existence. That gets you smack into the uncertainty principle again. And until people learn how to live with and embrace uncertainty as a principle of life, we do not succeed.
Yeah, I never thought of the negative implications with AI, but now that you start mentioning it, it can go down a bad road. It really can, because there's not full transparency there. Just look at, I can generate a picture right now that looks so real that it's just hard to detect that it was generated with AI.
They can imitate candidates.
Sure.
To say what their opponents want them to say, to persuade people to vote for them instead of their opponents, and that's going on now. You can have a foreign nation, and we can name any number of them, that have that capacity to affect an election in a whole different nation. It was used in the 2016 election. It was used in the 2020 election. It may not have been advertised broadly, but it was, because it's possible to do. You can make an image look exactly like anyone you want it to look like. You can make it talk the way that that person talks, same register, the same mental processes. Just use a good AI system.
Well, what's interesting is about 6 or so months ago, somebody used George Carlin, the great comedian who passed away at least 10 years ago, used his AI-generated voice to do a quote-unquote comedy bit for an hour. And it wasn't video of him, but it was images of the things that he was talking about. Personally, it wasn't. I don't think it was even close to being on point. But his daughter, George Carlin's daughter, is now suing the people that did it. Yeah. And the one thing's for sure, it was missing. It was, it sort of sounded like his voice, but it was missing a lot of that human inflection, especially with a comedy bit, if you will. But it's just one way it went wrong.
Let me go to a list of terms I made before the broadcast that I've utilized for years since I started teaching in the 60s and the 70s. There are properties of living organisms. All living organisms share these properties that can be described by words like they're all self-generative. They're all possessing of identity. They're all self-healing. They're all self-constructed. And those basic properties are really the language we can talk about for our computers. So do our computer systems enable those abilities? Now, we can use comparisons and do what's called the art of abstraction, to look at several living organisms together and ask ourselves, what are the properties they all share? Now, I just gave a list of abstract philosophical properties, but they have other names in mathematics, in algebra. And one property is that they all have identity, an identity element. They all have the ability to associate themselves with other elements in that group. They all have the ability to enable a reversible process so they can undo actions that have been performed. They all have an inverse property. Each element in a group of living organisms, has an inverse. And they all have a function of homeostasis. That's a $9 word for regulation. It's become a political term, and this is what's really funny, because certain candidates promise, well, I will make a society where we don't have to worry about regulating industry, because industry can't make its profits unless it can do what it wants to do. So you get rid of regulation. And the equivalent of that in the political economic arena is like in the health arena. What is diabetes as a disease? It's a condition in which the body is no longer able to regulate the excess glucose in the bloodstream. It means it's got an overload of sugar, and it can't cut that down through normal processes of regulation, homeostatic regulation, and the person can get ill or die. Same with the opposite. Not enough glucose. But in the marketplace, in the financial marketplace, we have that same issue of having too much money in the money, where we keep our money. And if you're awash in money and capital, you can kill your economy. You have a diabetic economy. And that's getting pretty much out there, but that's what we're dealing with.
When you hear one of those polls, the media release a poll and say, this candidate is ahead of that one, based on, surveys or whatever it is. What's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Illusion. It's an illusion. Because nobody's racing. So there can't be anybody that's neck and neck. Because it hasn't happened yet.
Wow.
And so it's all crap.
Yeah.
to bombard the public with that kind of concern. But it brings in money, profits, to the media and the people that are making those polls.
Gotcha.
It's a way to move public opinion to where people want it to be for their candidate or their issue.
Well, it's an interesting point you bring up, because if a poll comes out from the media, what do people do? Hey, new poll out. This candidate is ahead. We're going to be talking about that coming up in the next break. What are you doing? You're just grabbing people to listen to what you have to say. Pick any network, whatever it might be.
That's right. And you can get so addicted to that. You just line up and listen.
Yeah.
You might as well just take a drug.
This is what people don't realize is how the manipulation is going on. Like, here's an example. This came up. I was talking with a friend the other day. I interviewed Rod Stewart back in the day.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a regular thing. I still do, talk to celebrities, whatever. When I had him on the phone, I said, well, hey, how's Kelly doing? And he had just gotten married. I realized that Kelly was his ex-wife. So the conversation lasted 38 seconds. He hung up at that point. I never got the interview. However, it lasted 38 seconds. But in promoting, it was pre-recorded. Everything is pre-recorded typically. The promote was, coming up tomorrow morning at 8:15, we're going to be talking with Rod Stewart. What's he up to? Talk about his new marriage, everything. I made a mistake. I mentioned the wrong name. I never mentioned that in the promotion. So here we are routing people to a 38-second interview. They think it's live. So I bring that example up. That's what's going on with these polls. It's just grabbing people to keep them engaged as it's connected to advertising and networks and all of that. Interesting way of looking at things with AI, though. The points you bring up today.
It's stimulated a good conversation with more to come.
For sure. Yeah, I always appreciate your viewpoint, because I feel it's impartial and it's coming from a scientific angle, which we don't talk about. Nobody ever brings that up. So, Grant, truly appreciate you being here today.
Well, you're welcome.
All the best. We'll talk soon. Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Of course my kid's in the right car seat. Well, I think he is.
Yeah, my kid's in a booster seat. He was ready to move up. He is ready, right?
Her car seat looks like the right size.
There are probably rules on when to move up to a booster seat, aren't there?
Rear facing, forward facing. I think I have it right.
Car crashes are a leading killer of children 1 to 13. Are your children in the right car seat for their age and size? Don't think you know. Know you know. Go to safercar.gov/the right seat.
I know my child's in the right car seat, or else I wouldn't get in the driver's seat.
Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.